environmental career. We started Riverkeeper on the Hudson River. It was started by a blue-collar coalition of commercial and recreational fishermen who mobilized to reclaim the Hudson from the polluters. We have on the Hudson one of the oldest commercial fisheries in North America. They saw these were people who were factory workers, carpenters, lathers, electricians. They weren't your prototypical affluent environmentalists. They were people who had little expectation they'd ever see Yosemite or Yellowstone or the national parks. For them, the environment was their backyard. It was the bathing beaches, the swimming holes, the fishing holes of the Hudson. It was their livelihood. These were small business people who relied on a clean environment for their livelihoods, and they saw it being destroyed and subverted and stolen from them by big polluters. And they'd been to the government agencies that are supposed to protect Americans from pollution, to the Corps of Engineers, the Conservation Department, and the Coast Guard, and they were given the bum's rush. They were told, these are important people. We can't enforce the law against them. And by this evening in March of 1966, they came to the conclusion that government was in cahoots with the polluters, and the only way they were going to reclaim the river for themselves is if they confronted the polluters directly. And there was 300 men and women in an American Legion Hall. Almost all of them were former Marines. They were combat veterans from Korea and Vietnam, and they had come back and seen their fishery and their livelihood destroyed. They started talking about violence. They said, somebody said that they should have put a match to the oil slick that was coming out of the Penn Central pipe at the Croton Harmon rail yards and burn up the pipe. Somebody else said they should roll a mattress up and jam it up the pipe and flood the rail yard with its own waste. Somebody else said they should float a raft of dynamite into the intake of the Indian Point power plant. These weren't radicals, they weren't militants. They were people whose patriotism was rooted in the bedrock of our country. But that night, they were so frustrated with what they saw as the theft of their democracy that they started talking about doing illegal things. And then a man stood up who was a combat veteran from Korea, a Marine named Bob Boyle, who was the outdoor editor of Sports Illustrated magazine, and he had done an article about angling in the Hudson 2 years before. And in researching that article, he had come across an ancient navigational statute called the 1888 Rivers and Harbors Act that said that all pollution of water in this country was illegal. This was an 1888 statute. That there's a big penalty, but also there was a bounty provision that said that anybody who turned in the polluter got to keep half the fine. And he had called the libel lawyers at Time Inc. that owned Sports Illustrated and said, is this still good law? They sent him a memo back saying in 80 years it's never been enforced, but it's still on the books and it's good law. And that evening, when all these men and women were talking about violence, he stood up in front of them and he said, we shouldn't be talking about breaking the law, we should be talking about enforcing it. And they resolved that night that they were going to start a group that was then called the Hudson River Fishermen's Association. It later became the first Riverkeeper, and they began suing polluters on the Hudson and collected millions of dollars in bounties, and they used that money to build a boat that today patrols the river. And today the Hudson is the richest water body in the North Atlantic, and it's the last major river system left that still has all of its historical stocks of strong spawning stocks of all of its historical species of migratory fish. It's Noah's Ark, it's the species warehouse, and the miraculous resurrection spawned this and inspired the creation of 200 riverkeepers now, waterkeepers across the world. We have 17 in Australia, we have 30 in Latin America, we have almost 200 here in North America, each one with a patrol boat, each one with a full-time waterkeeper, and they're representing the interests of local communities in protecting their local water bodies. And what we know is that every city that has revitalized its downtown and its civic life, they've always started by revitalizing their waterfront and taking the waterfront back from the people who stole it. Because you'll see a trend where the big polluters and powerful entities within a society will try to fence the public off from their waterfront. And you know, Cleveland is a maritime city. You're here because of the river and because of the lake. And yet those things, there's been a steady effort to fence the people off through pollution and through control of the water, of the shoreline. And what this effort is about, and you look at cities like Boston, like Baltimore, like New York, like San Antonio, San Francisco, all over the country, is what they found, and what we found in the river is when we restored the river, the economic benefits reverberated out and affected the entire city. The land prices went up, civic participation went up, civic pride went up, and always the best investment you can do is start with the river. You need the grassroots, because the power of these entities that are the best measure of how a democracy functions is how it distributes the goods of the land. Does it maintain them in the hands of all the people, or does it allow them to be consolidated in the hands of the powerful few? And the first act in every tyranny throughout the history of mankind are always include actions by powerful local entities to steal from the public trust assets, the water, the air, the wildlife, the fisheries, the public land throughout our history. And now it's time for us to take those things back. And as the mayor said, and I'm going to shut up, but as the mayor said, one of the keys to democracy is communication. And you know, we've lost the television networks when Ronald Reagan abolished the Fairness Doctrine in 1988, so that they didn't have an obligation to serve the public interest anymore. They don't have the obligation to tell us the news. And so now all we get is entertainment, where the Americans, you know, they had an obligation to advance our democracy that was passed in 1928, and to promote the public interest by informing the American people about issues that were critical to us making rational decisions in a democracy. So they had to have a 6 o'clock news hour. That's why they have it. They didn't want it because they were all losing money on their news divisions, and they had to put the news on the radio. In 1988, Ronald Reagan abolished that as a favor to the Christian right, which was plotting the takeover of AM radio that's now complete, and as a favor to the big studio heads who'd helped him get elected, were plotting the takeover of all media, which now there's 5 giant corporations that control all 14,000 radio stations, all 2,200 TV stations. Everybody please turn off their cell phones. And I don't know how to turn this thing off. And they don't have any obligation to serve the public interest. Their obligation is their shareholders, and they serve that by expanding viewership. How do you do it? By appealing to the prurient interest that all of us have in the reptilian cores of our brains for sex and celebrity gossip. So they give us, you know, Brad and Jen and Brad and J-Lo and the gradual emotional decline of Britney Spears, and we know a lot about those things. We're the best entertained and the least informed people on the face of the earth, and you can't have democracy very long if you don't have an informed public, and that's what the Americans say. We've got to figure out all of these new ways, just like the right wing did in our country, just like the right wing, which the corporate right wing did, which is to figure out all these ways to communicate with their followers and their minions and their toadies. And now we have a way to communicate with people who are passionate about the environment, and about democracy. And what, you know, Stephanie figured out is there's 700 groups here in Ohio, or grassroots groups who are doing this in isolation day after day, these wonderful things to restore their community. But they had no way of communicating with each other. So she built a model here in Ohio, and now we're taking that model, we're going national with it, and then we're going to go international with it. And for people who care about democracy across the globe, and who care about their communities and care about the environment, this is going to be the way that they communicate with each other. And I'm so grateful to Stephanie for putting this together, for the energy and passion and resourcefulness and intelligence that she put into organizing this. And we're so proud of our partnership with you and with EcoWatch. And I want to thank the mayor and the councilman and the Gun Foundation and all the other people who have supported this wonderful effort, because I think it's really going to be transformative. And I'm as much as anything that I've done, I'm excited about this effort, because I really, really think it's going to transform our country. And I thank all of you for your involvement. Thank you.